My wife told me her parents would be staying just a few months. When I found out they'd sold their house without telling me, I started digging. What I found in their paperwork ended the visit, and nearly our marriage. It started with a text. Mom and Dad are coming next weekend. Just for a little while. It sounded harmless enough. Her parents had been struggling a bit, her father's work hours got cut, her mom's knees had gotten worse, and I assumed this was just a visit. A break. A chance for them to breathe. I didn't argue. I just replied, "Okay, we'll get the guest room ready." I had no idea I was about to lose my home piece by piece from the inside. When they arrived, they had boxes. Not suitcases. Not overnight bags. Boxes. Labeled. Taped. Organized. They came in 2 cars, both packed. One of the boxes had "Kitchen Essential" written on the side in Sharpie. I stood on the porch while my father-in-law waved at me and popped the trunk. My mother-in-law was already walking up the front steps with a reusable grocery bag over her shoulder like she'd done it 100 times before. "Hey," I said slowly, glancing at my wife. She smiled tightly like she was bracing for impact. "They just didn't want to leave everything in storage," she said. "It's only for a couple of months. Let's not make them feel weird." I didn't argue, because arguing would have meant I was making a big deal out of nothing. Except it wasn't nothing. It was the beginning of everything changing. The first week was tolerable. Crowded, sure. Their stuff spilled into the hallway. They cooked elaborate meals and filled the fridge with food I didn't recognize. But we made it work. They were polite. Grateful. Trying not to be in the way. The second week was different. That's when they started rearranging things. My father-in-law accidentally took down the framed photo in the hallway, the one from our wedding, and replaced it with a landscape print of a cabin in the snow. My mother-in-law reorganized the spice rack. They started leaving their shoes in the living room. Their laundry baskets showed up in our bathroom. And every time I mentioned it, my wife gave the same answer. "They're just getting settled." Settled. Like this was permanent. I tried to be patient. I worked long hours. I'd come home late, nod politely, and head straight to our bedroom, which was starting to feel like the only room that still belonged to me. Until even that changed. One night, I came home and found a folded blanket and pillow on the couch. Confused, I walked upstairs. Our door was closed. I knocked. My wife opened it, hair wet, pajamas on. "Hey," she said casually, like nothing was wrong. "What's with the pillow on the couch?" "Oh," she said, glancing over her shoulder. Mom's back was acting up. I told her she could sleep in our bed tonight. Just for one night. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. My voice caught in my throat. "So I'm on the couch now?" "Just tonight," she repeated. I looked at her. At her eyes that didn't look sorry. At the way she spoke like the decision had already been made long before I got home. And something shifted. I didn't sleep well that night. The couch creaked every time I moved. The air felt too cold. I could hear her father snoring from down the hall. But the loudest thing? The thought that I wasn't being included anymore. Things were happening to me. Not with me. Decisions. Changes. Shifts. And I was just expected to smile through them. The next morning, I woke up early and walked into the kitchen. My mother-in-law was already there, humming, wearing one of my wife's aprons. She offered me coffee like she owned the place. I mumbled thanks and stepped into the garage to get something from my toolbox. That's when I noticed it. More boxes. Stacked neatly in the corner. Labeled. Office. Linens. Craft room. Important documents. Craft room? They were unpacking now. Not just surviving. Settling. Claiming. That night, I asked my wife again. "How long are they staying?" She paused, turned the page of her book, didn't look up. "I told you. Just a couple months. You also told me they were visiting." She looked up now. "Why are you making this into a thing?" "Because I think it is a thing," I said quietly. "I think they're not visiting." Her face stiffened. "They had to sell the house." I blinked. "What? They didn't tell you?" "No," I said. "You didn't tell me." She shifted in the bed. It wasn't the right time. They were overwhelmed. It just made more sense to come here. "Without telling me?" Her voice got defensive. "I knew you'd react like this. That's why I waited." I sat there, heart thudding. So they sold their house? Moved here? Brought their entire lives? And didn't think it was important for me to know? They didn't think you'd understand. "I don't," I said. "And you didn't give me the chance to." She rolled over and turned off the light. I lay there in the dark, eyes open, listening to the sound of her parents laughing faintly downstairs. And I realized something chilling. This wasn't temporary. I just wasn't supposed to notice. The morning after I learned they'd sold their house, I woke up to the sound of drilling. Actual drilling. Inside the house, I came downstairs, still in sweatpants, rubbing my eyes, and found my father-in-law in the hallway with a power drill, measuring tape in one hand, pencil behind his ear. "What's going on?" I asked. He grinned. "Just putting up a few floating shelves. Your wife said this wall could use some storage." I blinked at him, then at the bare drywall. The hallway didn't need storage. It needed boundaries. I walked into the kitchen. My mother-in-law was making a smoothie. A loud one. She waved casually, then pointed at the fridge. "Hope you don't mind, I did a bit of a reorg. Made more space for meal prep." I opened the fridge. My lunch containers were gone, replaced by labeled plastic bins, labeled in someone else's handwriting. Fruit, veggies, dairy, sauces. It looked like a stranger's refrigerator in my own house. I didn't say anything. I just went back upstairs and closed the door behind me. That night, I asked my wife again, "Why didn't you tell me they sold the house?" She sighed like I was exhausting her. "We went over this. They didn't want to burden you." "They didn't burden me. You did." She gave me a look. "Don't make me choose." That stopped me cold. "I didn't ask you to choose," I said. Her voice softened, but it was rehearsed. "They're my parents. They're not trying to take over. They're just nesting." I stared at her. "You only nest where you intend to stay." I started paying closer attention. The boxes in the garage were now opened. One was full of linens. Another, office supplies. A third had what looked like legal folders. That one caught my eye. It had a bright orange tab on the side, the kind used for signatures. When no one was around, I opened it. Inside were several documents, neatly clipped, dated, notarized. One was the sale agreement for their house. Not a foreclosure. Not an emergency. A clean, voluntary transaction. Another was a wire transfer to my wife's personal bank account. My chest tightened. Below it, a printout of a zoning map and notes about potential in-law suite conversion scribbled in my father-in-law's handwriting. I closed the folder, put it back exactly how I found it. Then I stood in the garage for a long time, just breathing. That night at dinner, I watched them differently. They laughed, told stories, spoke over each other. My wife smiled more than she had in months. She looked lighter, but I felt the opposite, like I'd been pushed out of my own life by people who smiled while doing it. The next morning, I checked our bank records. The transfer was real. $85,000 from their account into hers, labeled Home Transition Support. I checked the mortgage account. Nothing had been paid toward our house. Not a dollar. I confronted her that night. "I looked at the account," I said. She didn't blink. I figured. "You took money from your parents for our house?" She paused. "They offered. I didn't ask. But you didn't tell me." "It wasn't a loan," she said quickly. "It was just so they could feel secure. They've been talking about building an in-law suite. Eventually. She hesitated. "We talked about it before. You said we had space." I said hypothetically. "Not secretly." She crossed her arms. "What's the big deal? It's not like they're strangers." "No," I said. "They're worse. They're residents now. And I didn't get a vote." We didn't speak for the rest of the night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while she faced the wall. And for the first time since we'd moved into that house, I felt like a guest. No, not a guest. An intruder. The next few days were quiet. Too quiet. My father-in-law stopped cracking jokes around me. My mother-in-law asked if I was under the weather. Even my wife kept her voice a notch softer. Like I might explode. But I didn't. Because exploding would have given them what they wanted, a reason to say I was unstable. Overreacting. Too intense. No. I needed facts. So I kept digging. I looked deeper into the zoning notes. Turns out my wife had filed for preliminary permits 2 months ago. Not even under my name. I found emails between her and an architect. Sketches. Layout drafts. She was planning to build a separate wing. For them. I hadn't even been looped in. Then, the final nail. I found a printed checklist inside one of the office boxes in the garage. Titled, Full Integration Plan, Summer Timeline. Transfer mailing address White Evie checkmark. Bank transfer to Rachel White Evie checkmark. Storage unit cleared White Evie checkmark. In-law suite discussion underway White Evie checkmark. Prepare initial will adjustment crossmark. That last one? Will adjustment. I felt my pulse in my teeth. They weren't just moving in. They were rewriting the future. And I wasn't in the draft. That night, I packed a small duffel. Just clothes. Charger. Toothbrush. I didn't leave. But I wanted to know I could if it came to that. Because if this was home, I didn't recognize it anymore. And if this was marriage, I didn't remember agreeing to it. The night I finally laid it out, I waited until everything was still. No humming blender. No hallway lights. No endless TV playing in the background. Just the soft weight of silence pressing into the walls and the kind of quiet that tells you no one can unhear what you're about to say. I sat at the dining table, the folder in front of me neatly arranged. Not angry. Not shouting. Just finished. She walked in wearing one of my sweatshirts. The same one she wore the first time we painted this room. That night we laughed and danced on drop cloths with the windows open. Now she looked at me like I was holding a weapon. I said nothing. She sat down slowly. What is this? You tell me. I slid the first page across the table, the wire transfer from her parents to her personal account. She looked at it. Didn't blink. Then the zoning requests. The permit drafts. The emails with the architect. And finally, the checklist from the garage. Full integration plan. With her initials at the bottom. I don't understand why you're going through our stuff, she said. That's the part you want to focus on? She crossed her arms, but her voice cracked. I wasn't hiding it. I was waiting for the right time. I leaned in. There is no right time to tell someone you made plans to restructure their entire life behind their back. She said nothing. So I kept going. Your parents didn't just move in. They absorbed the house. And you helped. You let me believe this was temporary while you signed zoning paperwork. Her voice rose, defensive. I didn't sign anything final. But you started the process. You took money. You made a plan. And you never once included me. She pushed the papers back toward me. You're making this a bigger deal than it is. I nodded. Okay. Then tell me what the plan was. The real one. She opened her mouth. Closed it. I was trying to help them. Were you? Her eyes flashed. They had nowhere to go. They had options. They sold their house by choice. They transferred their money to you, not to me. They drafted renovation ideas. And you gave them space. In this house. In our marriage. In your silence. She stood up. So what, you're leaving? I stood too. I think I already have. The sound of the words surprised us both. She stared at me. You don't mean that. I nodded slowly. I think I do. She didn't cry. Didn't scream. Just stood there, arms crossed, trembling. I was trying to take care of everyone. I wasn't everyone, I said. I was your husband. I grabbed my bag from the hallway. The one I'd packed 3 nights ago, just in case. And I walked to the door. She didn't follow. And that somehow hurt more than anything else. I moved into a rental on the other side of town. It wasn't much, 1 bedroom, a sagging couch, carpet that had seen better decades, but it was quiet. And more importantly, it was mine. No voices in the hallway. No rearranged furniture. No unfamiliar shoes by the door. No hidden paperwork in the garage. Just me, my things, and space to exhale. At first, I thought I'd hear from her right away. But she didn't call. Didn't text. Didn't ask where I went. For a week, nothing. Then came the message. Let me know when you're ready to talk. I read it. Locked the phone. Left it on the counter. There was nothing left to say that wouldn't shrink me back down to the version of myself who tolerated being edited out of his own home. I kept my head down. Went to work. Cooked simple dinners. Slept without earplugs. The first time I did laundry alone again, I stood there and stared at the washer like it was a new machine. Because no one had moved the detergent. No one had reorganized the shelf. No one had dumped their things into the basket and claimed the cycle. It sounds small, but it felt like breathing. A few weeks in, I picked up the rest of my things. She wasn't there when I came. Said she'd give me space. Her parents were, though. They didn't speak. Her dad stood by the stairs, arms crossed. Her mom lingered by the kitchen, arms folded, lips pursed. I didn't speak either. I walked to the bedroom. Took what was mine. A duffel bag of clothes. A few books. The photo of our wedding I'd tucked in the closet when they first arrived. As I passed the garage, I noticed the boxes were all unpacked now. No more tape. No more Sharpie labels. Just furniture. Cabinets. Shelves. Built-ins. Permanent. I left the key on the table. Not out of ceremony. Out of clarity. Later that night, she finally called. I miss you, she said. I stayed silent. I thought we were stronger than this. We could have been, I said. But you made a choice. And I wasn't part of it. She started to cry. I didn't want to hurt you. You didn't want to inconvenience them. Long pause. I thought you'd come around. I thought you'd ask me, I said. I didn't block her. I didn't hang up. But I didn't say I was coming back either. Because I wasn't. Some people think leaving means slamming doors. Shouting. Throwing plates. I left with a folded shirt and a silent key drop. Because when trust dies quietly, you don't need noise to bury it. She reached out a few more times. Small things. Hope you're okay. I saw this and thought of you. One day, she sent a photo of our dog from years ago. No caption. I looked at it, smiled, then deleted it. Closure doesn't come when they apologize. It comes when you no longer need them to. I saw her once more. 6 months later. At the grocery store. Same aisle. Cereal section. She looked different. Tired. I nodded. She nodded back. Neither of us said a word. She looked down at her cart. I looked at mine. Then we passed each other like strangers who once shared a lifetime. I went home. Cooked dinner. Put on a record. Sat on the couch with the window open. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't wonder if someone else was moving my things when I wasn't looking. The house I left behind? I don't miss it. Because it stopped being home long before I walked out. I've started looking for a place. Nothing big. Just mine. A porch. A clean kitchen. Maybe a room for people who knock before they enter. I'm not in a hurry. Because now I know. I'd rather live in a quiet apartment alone than in a house full of people who think they belong more than I do. Some choices don't need revenge. Just exit. And some love doesn't end in fire. It ends in silence. And never looking back.